Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Corral, and I am the Interim Executive Director of United Latinx Fund. Welcome to tonight's Fireseide CharLA. Before we begin tonight's program, we're excited to share that all of our events are available in Spanish via Zoom's real-time translation feature. To share more about how this works, I'd like to introduce you to our Spanish language interpreter, Alejandra Marroquín.
Gracias, Richard. Como dijo Richard, yo me llamo Alejandra Marroquín y soy parte de un grupo de intérpretes aquí en Los Ángeles. Y bueno, queremos compartir qué es la idea de la justicia de idioma. Y eso es el derecho de que todos tenemos, el derecho de hablar, de escuchar y ser entendidos en el idioma en el cual nos sentimos más cómodos. Ahorita estamos haciendo interpretación consecutiva, pero en un momento vamos a empezar nuestra interpretación simultánea. También queremos recordarles de que el espacio bilingüe es un espacio que todos y todas tenemos la responsabilidad de crear. Entonces, si a cualquier momento ven a Richard hacer ciertos gestos, por favor, siga el paso de él. También queremos comentar que no sufran en silencio si en cualquier momento tienen problemas tecnológicos. Por favor, indique su problema en la caja de conversación y alguien le va a poder ayudar ahí también. También cuando vayamos a aprender la interpretación, va a haber un globo hacia la mano derecha, hacia abajo. Ahí puede indicar su idioma de preferencia. Y como están escuchando, estamos escogiendo de usar la E versus la A o la O. Esto no es un error, es intencional, es nuestro esfuerzo para quebrar los binarios de género. Gracias y con eso se lo paso a Richard.
Thank you, Alejandra, and we thank you and your translation team and interpretation team for your service. As Alejandra had mentioned, we are intentionally creating a bilingual
Como
space.
dijo Alejandra, estamos creando.
We're intentionally creating a bilingual space that is a shared responsibility of everybody. And as she had mentioned earlier, we're initially doing consecutive interpretation, but now we are going to start simultaneous translation. So Jake, please activate the translation function now. A note to our speakers, if you see our team members make this gesture, please decrease the pace of your comments so that the translator can keep up. Damas y caballeros, tenemos traducción en español disponible para este programa. Por favor, seleccione español en el menú debajo. Gracias. Tonight's Fireside Charla is brought to you in partnership with the United Latinx Fund and Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. This online event series aims to engage, educate, and advocate on important and timely topics that impact LA's Latinx community during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as in response to the civil unrest due to the murder of George Floyd. I'd like to quickly thank the sponsors for tonight's event, Southern California Gas Company and JP Morgan Chase, for their commitment to and investment in nonprofits like the United Latinx Fund that work to transform, uplift, and improve our community's quality of life. Our program is designed to engage you, our audience. So if you have a question, please enter it in your chat box. And Cindy, the president of the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles, will monitor the chat box and will summarize your questions during the question and answer period. Everyone's audio and video will be muted until the Q&A. Also, tonight's program is streaming on Facebook Live. So to access the video, please visit the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles' Facebook page. A link is provided in the chat box. And please host a watch party. I'll be also hosting a watch party on my phone, so please join us. To introduce tonight's panelist, I offer United Latinx Fund Board President, Helen Romero Shaw. Helen. Make sure Helen is unmuted. Let's try one more time, Helen. Make sure to unmute your computer. Try one more time.
One more time. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have a terrific program, and it's my pleasure to introduce two dynamic women. We really appreciate their joining us. I am the current president of the United Latinx Fund, and it's my pleasure to serve in that role. Last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed 2 bills, Senate Bill 1276 and Senate Bill 1141, authored by Senator Susan Rubio, that provides protections and services for domestic violence survivors. Tonight, we are joined by California Senator Rubio, who will give us more information on these bills. And she is joined by Ms. Karen Gonzalez, founder of Helping Hands, a resource center for those affected by trauma and violence that provides basic necessities needed to move forward and rebuild their lives. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for tonight's CharLA LA. This is ULF board member Alejandra Velasquez, who is Director of Public Affairs at Opportune.
Good evening.
So take it away, Alejandra.
Thank you so much, Helen, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for what I believe will be a very interesting conversation. You know, we have been in this pandemic since March, and, you know, we keep hearing about, you know, safer at home orders, but the reality is that not everybody is safer at home. And it has, you know, the pandemic has really exacerbated a lot of issues that have already existed, you know, for a lot of people in their families, in their personal lives. And so I want to commend Senator Rubio and our other speaker, Karen Gonzalez, for really being leaders in a space that has generally affected women, but really affects people of all genders, all backgrounds. And so I'd like to start off with Senator Rubio. Congratulations on having your 2 bills signed by the governor. That's very exciting. Can you share with us a little bit more about what these bills would actually do, what issues they're addressing?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you so much to Richard and everyone that puts this together. I think it's important to continue conversations on issues affecting women of color, minorities, and I know that all the topics that you address are so important and so relevant to today's time. But for me in particular, this month is really important, and I thank the organizers for allowing me to speak today in the month of October, since it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it's an issue that I set out to tackle when I got elected to the state Senate. This one in particular proved a little bit more challenging than most. I tried to pass coercive control last year, but we ran into a little bit of opposition, and rightfully so. A lot of people don't understand what it is and what it does. And so coercive control, which is the bill that you're speaking of, SB 1141, is something that typically is not able to be used in courts. It's not recognized. Typically, when we think of a victim, we think of bruises on the face, bruises on the body, and not necessarily the trauma and the psychological abuse that victims suffer for years prior to actually being assaulted physically. So what this bill will do is will allow victims to actually use coercive control as supporting evidence in court. So for example, you know, I've heard so many traumatic stories as I've been in the legislature, and prior to, I've been interviewing a lot of victims, just hearing their stories and what is one of the biggest issues. And this is the #1 issue for most of the victims that I spoke to, is not being able to talk about the trauma that happens. That's not necessarily psychological, but it really does impact their entire being. So coercive control are items like isolating a victim away from friends and family, also depriving them from basic necessities. Sometimes it's as simple as food, sometimes it's as simple as going to sleep. I'll tell you, there's a victim that I spoke to that was tied up for 4 days by her intimate partner. And every time she wanted to go to sleep, she was shaken violently. So he kept her up for 4 days, and in the process also deprived her from food. And I want you all to think about that. These are tactics usually used in the military to break down the enemy, right? After 4 days, people become delirious. And this is what this one woman experienced. And yet she wasn't able to use any of it as supporting evidence. And so we wanted to make sure that we put a name to it. So again, it's coercive control. One of the other items is also controlling the person's life. For example, right now, technology is one of the biggest issues for victims. Either they're not able to use text messaging without their intimate partners demanding for them to turn it over so they can read the text messages. They will go on the internet, for example, Facebook, either pretend to be them and send out messages to people, either to ruin their reputation, ruin their credibility, or just simply as an intimate partner telling people to stay away. And sometimes people do. And lastly, sometimes they will just take their credit cards, not because they need financial support, but they'll either max out credit cards. And the reason they do that is their goal is to ruin their credit rating, because typically when a victim flees, you're looking for a place to live. And if someone has maxed out your cards, ruined your credit, and also ruin your credibility, it makes it that much harder for a victim to walk away from the relationship. So once again, that is why it's defined now as coercive control in the family code. And now victims can use this as supporting evidence. We don't have to show up anymore with a picture of a bruise or a broken arm. Now you can actually document this information. And now it's by way of this bill, now the courts have to accept it. So I'm really happy to be able to support victims.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. Now turning to Karen, can you tell us a little bit more about Helping Hands, what you see in your work, and how you believe that the senators, new laws passed promoted by the senator will help the work that you do?
Hi, well, thank you so much, guys, for having me here. And thank you, Senator, for just doing an incredible job and getting something so life-saving passed, because you truly understand the reality, right, that domestic violence kills. It doesn't just leave black and blue marks. So thank you for that. Helping Hands Resource Center. It's an organization that helps victims and survivors of domestic violence with their basic necessities like food, basic needs, trauma therapy, not just therapy, I'm sorry, education, counseling, and we also have advocacy. So I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I did go through this about 9 years ago. And the way that the organization was formed was through my own experience and seeing, you know, the lack of services that were being given to survivors. And now that I'm hearing, you know, the new bill that is being passed, like honestly, as an advocate that I do now see the survivors, you know, it's going to be something that's going to help us, because right now, like she was saying, none of this can be used, right? Just through COVID alone, it's been, our job has quadrupled in numbers, you know, of just every single day, people just calling and seeking out. So now that we can help them, you know, put this as proof, you know, and get that restraining order, get whatever is needed for them to stay safe. Like this is such a needed thing. And it's so, we've all been waiting for this in the front line. You know, we know that this is important and that people do die, you know, every 9 seconds in the United States, women are beaten, you know, and it's not just a women issue, men are also going through this, but then we also have to think about the children that are witnessing this. So when the senator talks about trauma, right, we all are also talking about this epidemic that is now passing on to our next generation, which is our children. Right. And when we think about trauma, which is toxic stress, that's what our children are repeating when this violence is being perpetrated in their homes. So for us, it's very important to have something like this to use, you know, as proof in court to help that family start over.
Great. Thank you. A question for both of you. What gaps do you think still remain that could be addressed on a policy level to continue helping domestic violence survivors?
Well, if I may start, well, funding continues to be one of the biggest challenges, and it's something that I will continue to fight for. But I wanted to give an example, and I think Karen did a great job of expressing, you know, the trauma that some of our victims go through. But what's happening during this pandemic, the number of calls that have been made to shelters are you know, they've grown tremendously. And unfortunately, so many of our families have had to be turned away. And that's just during the pandemic. So I wanted to share some numbers from 2018 to 2019 in domestic violence shelters. They were not able to provide 18,808 family with services. So I want everyone to think of that number. That's over 18,000 families left without support. And everyone wants to help. It's not a matter of wanting to help and wanting to provide support, but the resources are still lacking. So we will continue to fight for resources and ensure that victims have the support they need. But I would also say just education in general. I'm also a victim of domestic violence, so I understand it very personally and firsthand how the outside world doesn't comprehend certain things like why didn't a woman leave or why didn't she speak soon enough. But Karen is here to kind of attest to the fact that it takes so much out of a person to be able to speak about this personal experience, because typically, which is one of the biggest gaps, I think, especially in the Latinx community, is that we're taught that things that happen with intimate partners and marriages typically stay behind closed doors. And so we need to destigmatize this. There's nothing to be ashamed of. It is not the victim's fault. And we need to continue to educate and make sure that everyone knows it's okay to speak up and it's not your fault and you shouldn't be embarrassed over it.
Thank you, Senator. And I agree, it's a lot of funding. You know, we're not a shelter. We are just an organization that is, excuse me, part of a faith-based community. So we are part of a church. You know, we were created because of the lack of services, like I said, funding. And when we think about that, 18,000 families that are being displaced, who takes care of them, you know? And exactly what she's saying. I have had to physically talk to those women that are like, what do I do? They're sending me away. There's nowhere I can go. And, you know, I feel sometimes that our hands are tied when we don't have funds, when we don't have anyone paying attention to this. So for me, I'm very big on awareness and education, because that's how we prevent future violence. Is how do we break that cycle? Is by preventing it right now, is talking about it, is having these types of conversations, right? Because exactly what she's saying, in our communities, it is so, it's something that we accept. It's something that our culture says it's normal. So then we are teaching our society then that's normal, and that's not normal. You know, that is not the way that we should be treated not just as women, but as people. You know, so love, respect, and honor is something that we all need to teach. And I think it also starts in education and awareness.
So if I may add, may I add just a little bit on that? And I think not only education for victims as far as what they can do, but I think families struggle with it as well. When family members actually witness domestic violence, see it firsthand, it is not something they feel comfortable even, you know, and not talking about it, first of all, but secondly, they're not capable of picking up the phone and maybe calling for help. And it's become really difficult to get the family members, whether it's a parent, a sister, a cousin, to really understand that any moment could be really, you know, a moment of life or death for that victim. And, you know, through all the education that I've done for myself and all the victims that I've interviewed, many of the families will say, I saw the signs, I saw him, you know, pulling her hair, dragging her, but they didn't say anything. I think families always think it's going to get better. You know, it's a moment in time. Maybe I shouldn't get involved, but also educating the family members that when they see something, do something or seek out help or counseling, because that moment, again, could be very detrimental to the victim. It's a matter of life and death. And believe me, I've talked to many family members that have family members who've actually been deceased based on the abuse that they received. So let's say something when we see something. So I just wanted to add that.
No, thank you.
Just really quick to that. She's 100% in that. It's prevention and awareness and education is for the community as well. Yeah. So like for Helping Hands, we have an event called the Purple Event, which we're actually doing it. This is our 8th one. We do every October for domestic violence awareness. And that's to educate not just our churches, but communities, people, our families, to understand what a victim, what a survivor, what children go through, right? So the senator is 100% correct. It's about educating other people to truly understand that domestic violence is dangerous. And if you see it, you've got to call what you see to prevent it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. One last quick question. We have the senator here representing government, and we have Helping Hands representing nonprofits. And I know that in the audience, we have people that represent both sectors and including the corporate sector. What's a way that all these different sectors can come together and help to really address this issue?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think it's part of what some of our community partners are doing here, sponsoring this event. So a lot of the times we also encourage just either our businesses, local businesses, or corporations to really look at shelters and see where they can sponsor or support. They're always very helpful in giving grants in different areas. I encourage all our community partners to look into domestic violence shelters. Right now, they're really hurting. The pandemic has really caused a lot of strain in terms of finances and resources. And if anybody can, help out financially, that's one of the biggest way they can help in this moment.
And I say the same thing, if you can help somehow, some way, please do. Is your shelters, is your community organizations, is those people that are picking up when others are not even noticing we are. So I just say to you, please, anything helps, anything. And it's not just money, it's also your time. It's also your gifts, your talents. So all of us have a way and a way to give back. And, I always tell people when we create our events is that together we can end violence. Like that truly is a true thing when we come together and we have these conversations. Or for example, as a community leader saying, I don't have all the answers, but I know that this other community resource or nonprofit or, a government official can help. So it's also, I think, connecting everyone to know who is doing what where.
And if I can add to that, sometimes I don't want anyone to think that it's a big donation, big contribution. So I'll give you an example. There's a cosmetic company who has been very gracious, and they offered, $5,000 worth of little gift bags with cosmetics. Sometimes victims are not feeling particularly, good about themselves, and it's simple as donating products for their hair, their face. It's so small, but yet it makes a big impact to those victims that are not feeling, like I said, necessarily their very best. So something as simple as that would help as well.
Thank you. I think that's something for all of us to think about, how it is that in our individual or professional roles can actually be supports. I wanted to turn it over to Cindy with the Latino Coalition of LA to see if we have any questions from the audience, either for the senator or for Karen.
Thank you, Alejandra, and thank you, Senator and Karen, for joining us this evening on a very, very important topic. I currently don't see any questions on the chat box, but I would like to give an opportunity for anybody from the panel to, add on anything that they want to add to what they shared tonight, or give an opportunity for any of the moderators to add any questions.
Well, if I may, this is such an important topic. There's so much to talk about, but I do want to just highlight the moment we're in, which is COVID-19. And I think someone mentioned it prior to, as soon as this program started, that stay-at-home orders doesn't mean safer at home for every person. Right now, this is the ideal situation for any abuser, because we are forcing families and victims to be isolated with their abusers. Typically, we have either victims going to work or being around family members. So it gives a bigger opportunity for family members or people at work to either report what they see or try to support that victim. Now that we've been sheltering in home for so long, it is very difficult to see what the needs are for that victim. So if I may offer a couple quick tips for those that are currently locked behind closed doors, that are probably watching this and may not have a way of helping themselves. They are simple tips that they can follow. I mean, there's many, but I'm just going to offer 5. So number 1, please ask a family member or a trusted friend to check in on you every single day. A 1 call daily just to see if you're okay. Because sometimes we tend to think everything is okay and we disconnect for weeks, but a victim needs that call every single day. Please have them check in on you. Number 2, when there is violence in the home, a moment can turn deadly. And what that means is when there's fights, they can easily grab, an abuser can grab a knife or anything that they have in sight. So it's recommended that they remove anything from the home that could be a potential weapon. So if you have knives on the counter, it is best to remove them from the counter and put them away. If there's a bat handy, let's put it in the closet. Things that an abuser can grab right away and assault a victim, we need to remove them from sight. So that would be a second recommendation. Number 3, have a safety plan in place. We don't think of something as simple as memorizing the domestic violence hotline. When you're stressed and in a panic, trying to find that number may not be the easiest thing. So please memorize that number and always know where the closest police station is so that you can get help if you need to. As I mentioned before, that we need to figure out how to get a family member, a trusted friend, or anyone that you want to check in on you. But that needs to be followed with some kind of signal that you both have developed to let the person checking in on you that you're in danger. It could be a simple word, a simple color that you wear, because if you're in danger, typically you're not able to call 911. So we need that friend or family member to do it for you. So please develop that signal. If you're in danger, they need to call 911 for you if you can't do it for yourself. And last but not least, also, if you are in danger or your family is in danger and you can't safely do this, pick up the phone and call 911. They are there to help. And so please trust them when it comes to going to your home and helping you. So call 911 if you can. So I would offer those 5 tips, and hopefully people that need it are listening. Thank you.
And of course, I would add, thank you so much, Senator, is that phone number is for the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. And they do have advocates that can help you and anything that you have questions for. Also 211, that's a city resource that can help walk you through even finding a shelter or any type of help in our city resources. And one of the tips that I love that she shared was, you know, memorizing that phone number, but also if you have children, teach your children how to call 911. You know, teach your children how to stay safe, because remember, if you have children, it's the safety plan is not just for you, it's for your whole family. So, you know, reach out to an advocate. I would be happy to walk you through even creating a safety plan. You know, you can look into our website. It's helpinghandsresourcecenter.org. And, you know, please stay safe. Exactly what the senator is saying right now. There is so much danger because of COVID. Everyone is forced to stay at home. And that's why I was saying, you know, our group went from having like 600 survivors to now having 2,400 survivors, you know, in a matter of 4 months, you know, and that's a huge increase. It might not sound like a lot, but it is when these women and children and men are like, where do I go? Where do I do? So just be mindful and please educate, you know, educate other people that this can take your life. My life was almost taken, and like the senator, you know, we both understand the reality of it. So know that you're not alone.
Thank
And
you,
if
ladies.
do we have time for a few more?
I do have a question on the chat box that I know Karen touched on real gently, but I would like if you ladies could please expand on this. Sharing this information with children, but with daughters. How can we share this information specifically with daughters? Because it is a very sensitive issue to, you know, speak to them about. So any comments on that?
Absolutely. I know that sometimes we think that children are too young to hear this information, but I will share that I was a teacher for 17 years, and I would see young kids at the age of 9, 10, already manipulating each other, already telling their little partners who they can hang out with, who they can talk to. That is just like the beginning of something that could go very wrong. And so I wanted to add that because of my experience with our youth in our schools, I also passed a bill last year that would mandate that the National Domestic Violence Hotline be printed on every ID card in the state of California from 7th grade to 12th grade and also higher education. So the very basic thing to do is, you know, ask your children to know that the number is there, to let them know that there's danger. They could always turn their ID and the number will be there for them to be able to call either for themselves or their parents. Because we know that it doesn't only happen to adults, it happens to children too. In fact, I've interviewed a young lady who her first kick and her first punch was at the age of 13. So I want everyone to think about that. Sometimes we envision victims being adults and being able to handle themselves. This young lady was 13. And so again, please know that there's a domestic violence hotline. Now it became law this year, and I'm very proud of that. But let's talk to them. I think it's better to take that risk for you to think that they're too young to hear this information, but it's important for them to know what is domestic violence and for them to also recognize the signs.
And we have to remember that children model behavior, right? So if we see bullying, that's a form of violence, that's coming from someplace. So children already know what violence is. You know, it's all over media, social media, movies, games. So it's also what is their influence, right? So we as parents have to also have that responsibility that if we're allowing our children to see or be around certain things, that they're going to model that behavior and to teach them that that's not a correct thing to do. So also know that we influence our children highly.
Cindy, any additional questions?
Thank you, ladies. I have one more for you. We do have a member of Sonta International on the chat box, and what she shared is that they're going to engage in a 16-day campaign of activism starting on November 25th to say no to violence against women. Will Senator Rubio and Helping Hands be doing anything to bring more attention to the crisis of increasing domestic violence during COVID?
I actually do have a webinar coming up in the next couple weeks. I believe it's the 20th. Right now, I'm trying to hold on to that webinar because we have some victims that are going to be showing up and being part of that webinar. So we're trying to keep them safe, but it will be recorded in my Facebook and they would have access to that information. But we are certainly bringing a lot of groups together, making sure that every victim out there has all the information they need. So yes.
Awesome.
And for us, we have an actively weekly domestic violence group, so it's all virtual. We also have, for the month of October, they're called Purple Conversations. We're coming once a week on Tuesdays. Also, all this information is on our website. And then on October 17th, we're having our annual Purple event, which is a 2-hour, it's also a fundraiser because it helps the organization, but mainly is about bringing prevention and education, and we bring voices of survivors, we bring paints, a lot of different artists that are also victims and were victims at once, but are now in the community, you know, healing the community as well.
Awesome.
And if I may add, I'm going to be joining Senator Holly Mitchell this Sunday. She typically has a coffee or tea with Holly Mitchell. If you can go on her website, I'm going to be a guest in one of her coffees. Again, she calls them teas as well, but she's going to invite me to share more information on some of these policies and resources. So please look in her website and join us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then Senator Rubio, one last question for you. If you can repeat the name of the bill that you said you passed with the DV hotline number on the ID card. Somebody in the chat box wanted to look at it.
Sure. So I will share a couple really quickly. Number one, SB 273, it's called the Phoenix Act. I passed it last year. The statute of limitations when a victim can actually bring their abusers to justice was 3 years. That meant that women never really had, I'm sorry, I always say victims because we know men as well. They don't have enough time to heal and bring their abusers to justice. So this bill changed the statute of limitations from 3 years to 5 years, giving victims more time to get therapy, feel confident that they can speak up. Number two, SB 316, that's the student identification card that now it's going to require all schools to print the number in the back of the ID cards. Number three is also SB 1190, which I co-authored with Senator Durazo, which will allow victims of crimes. In particular, I was thinking of victims of domestic violence to be able to walk away from their lease if their life is in danger without ruining their credit. So they have that option to walk away without fear of their credit. Number three, we also have AB 381 that I co-authored with Assemblymember Reyes, which is college sexual assault and violence prevention training. And so there's a lot more, but I know our time is limited, but those are important bills to note. And lastly, I will say SB 1276, typically during the years, all organizations have fundraisers to supplement some of the funding that they need. Well, most organizations, in order to get federal funds, they need to have a 10% matching fund in order to get that. I just passed SB 1276, which the governor just signed as well, which is a domestic violence service provider protection program. That means that shelters, domestic violence advocates don't need to have matching funds to get resources, and that's going to put more money in their pocket to be able to help more victims.
Thank you so much to both of you ladies for sharing all this very, very important information and for all the work that you're doing to advocate on the behalf of this really important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to thank our moderator, Alejandra Velasquez, ULF board member. I also, of course, want to thank board president Helen Romero Shaw for the introduction. And of course, I want to thank Cindy, LCLA board president, for her moderation of the Q&A. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your leadership on that. And as always, I want to not only thank the panelists, Senator Susan Rubio, as well as Karen from Helping Hands, but I also want to invite you and encourage you all to attend next week. I feel like I'm always sort of saying the same thing where I'm like, you know, cross your fingers that we're able to secure the guest because, you know, we're a weekly program, so sometimes, you know, we're still working actively to secure our guests, but we're trying very hard to secure the leadership of the Luskin School of Public Affairs, Dean Gary Segura, as well as the Executive Director of the Latino Policy and Politics Initiative, Sonia Diaz, who was also the former board president of ULF as well. And we're trying to secure them to as the culmination of a 3-part series celebration of Latinx Heritage Month that is being led by our partners, the Latino Coalition of Los Angeles. So we're hoping to wrap up Latinx Heritage Month next week, which is on October the 15th, with an overview of the state of political issues, challenges, and opportunities facing the Latinx community, the importance of our vote, as well as the potential issues and outcomes of the upcoming election. So it's going to be an exciting conversation, and we'll keep you updated and engaged, and hopefully you can attend